Okay, so welcome again, everyone, to our webinar today, Leading in Difficult Times. And I think everybody would agree these are difficult times. These are unforeseen times, times we've never, couldn't have imagined really, maybe with a good sci-fi book or movie, but in normal circumstances, there was no way in the world to predict the outcome. I'm not going to get political here, but whether you followed or agreed with all of the points made by the president during his State of the Union address, the statistics were still great. The bottom line is our economy was booming, unemployment low, people feeling good about their future in many, many ways. And then all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, we were hit by this massive curveball, which like absolutely sideswiped us and has created so much uncertainty for us. And I think for leaders in particular, it is a unique challenge. I am curious, by the way, before we go deeper here, if you could tell me your industry. So if you're an educator, just write education. If you're in finance, if you're in sales, whatever it is, but specifically the kinds of industries you're in, lots of educators so far, which is great. Welcome all of you. A lot of folks, by the way, who are not educators. I've presented quite a few for educators recently, nonprofits, okay. Others, thank you, Marcy, for that. Keep them coming. Would love to see if we have people from other industries on the call as well. But for now, regardless, I think the concept of education is universal and we are struggling with it. So let's talk a little bit more here and understand that before we get into the specifics, we do need to realize that the challenges that we face can be very isolating, right? Oftentimes, especially now that we're at home and we feel kind of cut off from our peers, cut off from, from others. In fact, in the article that I just shared with you before, which I hope you will open, I talk about how in education in particular, but I think it's relevant to really any industry nowadays. And that is that it can be a very isolating task. You go into your office or your classroom, you do your magic with your students, but you don't necessarily have tremendous opportunity to interact with others. And that's when you are active in a building with other people. You can only imagine what it's like when you're going to work means sitting down at a computer and trying to see people virtually. And you're really not connecting with your peers very much. So I think one of the benefits of creating webinars like this, minimally, certainly for me, and I hope for you as well, is that it creates a forum, it creates a community where we're coming together, we are recognizing the value in our learning, but we're also recognizing the value in our conversation, in our support, and the fact that we are doing things together. And you're not alone. Your challenges as a leader are not uniquely your own. Everybody's dealing with them in one form or another. So yes, we need to be safe and we need to be kind. We definitely want to talk about staying strong and what that means from a leadership standpoint. So we will unpack all of that, but I thought that that was an important piece. And as I've done in the past, I'd like to begin as well with a prayer for safety for all of us, that we should stay well. Hopefully we are all well currently and should stay well, that we should be able to move forward from our current confinement soon. The spring is here, and if you are Jewish or you know anything about the Jewish calendar, you know that the holiday of Passover is coming up. It's a holiday of redemption, a holiday of leaving slavery and servitude and moving on to a period of redemption. And I really hope that for all of us, we do enter into redemption, not only in a physical sense of the term, but also financially, emotionally, in all ways that we feel confined right now, that we should be able to lean on each other and hope that everything around us works out as quickly and as safely as possible so that we can restore normalcy in our lives. And with that, I would like to move on into our conversation today and to briefly share a little bit about me. For those of you who do not know, I, like many of you in education, was in that field for many years. I'm a former educational leader. Now I do executive coaching, organizational consulting. And if you scroll through the bullets over here, you will see that that bottom one of part-time gardener is starting to become more and more full-time as I have more time on my hands and the weather starts to improve. Definitely looking forward to more gardening, but not at the expense of the work that I do. And so I help leaders who are struggling to manage their workloads, get home at a decent hour, manage their productivity and whatnot, to learn how to delegate, to be productive, to get the right things done. And of course, I still love to talk to teachers about all things education. So that's a little bit about me. And you can find me on social media on really almost every platform, at least the four big ones, at Naftali Hoff, or on Twitter specifically at Impactful Coach. So if you'd like to tag me on anything related to this webinar or just in general, feel free. I would love to join the conversation with you. Okay, so now we are really ready to begin. And I'm going to ask you to take a look at this list. These are three of the challenges that I've identified as being primary for leaders today. Number one, the general situation in which we find ourselves, the confusion, the uncertainty. Businesses are laying people off. The economy has tanked. COVID-19 is affecting us in every manner possible. That's number one. Number two, as a result of that, at least in part, we have massive issues with communication. People are virtual. Many people are not used to working virtually. Many people are not used to leading virtually. And so as a result of that, communication has become a problem and a big challenge for leaders. And number three, because of a variety of factors, productivity has become a challenge as well. So I'm curious to know from your vantage point, which of these three, if I spent meaningful time unpacking that for you and really providing you with some meaningful solutions, things that you could take away and utilize in your workplace and in your daily professional practice, which would represent the biggest breakthrough for you? Would it be number one, two, or three, and a number is sufficient? Okay, keep the answers coming. So it's interesting to me, but not surprising, that the answers really represent all of them. There was a lot of twos and threes at the beginning. One made somewhat of a comeback before. So we're going to try to hit on all of them. And by the way, I do apologize. I don't have a perfect soundproof space by which to do these webinars. And like many of you, I have my entire family home. So that's my new normal. And I hope that you will tolerate yours as well, this as well as we move forward with our presentation. Keep the comments coming, by the way, because even if I don't acknowledge you directly, you know that your colleagues are looking and your colleagues are watching. And so we're sharing ideas. And that's what I meant with community. And that's also what I meant by really creating a sense that you're not alone in this. So we've got to deal with the confusion and the uncertainty as best we can. Nobody's a prophet here. Certainly, I cannot give you anything that is foolproof, but we're going to try to at least address some of the challenges that leaders have to overcome in addressing these issues. Again, this is all from the leadership standpoint. So if you're not a leader of others, first of all, you're still a leader of yourself and of your family. But secondly, it's still good to know the vantage point from which the leader is in fact operating. So these are just good things to know, and whatever strategies we will unpack hopefully will help you in your daily life moving forward. Okay, so as we talked about, we got to address all three. Let's go through them in order. Number one, in order to address the issues of uncertainty and confusion, people need strong leaders, right? Sometimes we need to be stronger than we think we are. Oftentimes from the outside looking in, we look at leaders and they seem so secure, they seem so confident, everything is measured and all of that. Oftentimes, if you're a real leader, you know that you oftentimes have those butterflies in your stomach and you're really not sure. And they're things that keep you up at night. But yet we still have to find a way to provide strong leadership to others that desperately need it. Number two, figure out ways to improve upon our current communication or perhaps keep it going, depending on where it is, but effective communication is critical. And number three, to find ways to increase productivity, because whatever it is that we do, we need to be doing more of it. Okay, in many cases. Obviously, in some instances, our businesses have slowed down, so productivity for some may not be as much of an issue today, but God willing, we will get past this soon, and then hopefully the economy will really pick up, and you'll have the benefit of understanding what productivity tips will help you and your team move processes forward, get things done, and really scale and amplify output. Okay, that's our mission for today in the time that we have remaining. And so I'd like to unpack all of these with you, but do understand that I can't go deep with everything because we only have a limited amount of time. So I'm going to choose a couple of these to go a little bit deeper with, but fundamentally understand that all of these contribute to strong leadership. And let's go through all of them one at a time. Number one, we have to control our own fears, which can be, as we already talked about, a very difficult thing because you'd have to almost be superhuman to not be afraid. Yes, you could be a person of faith and that can help, but at the end of the day, fear is to be expected, right? Fear of the unknown, fear of your financials, fear of your future on so many levels. There's so many things. Things are going to get worse in many ways before they get better. And we can't emanate leadership. We can't project leadership to others and strength and confidence to others if we are a mess inside. So we have to find ways to control our own fears, whether that's exercise, meditation, self-talk, discussing things like what's the worst that could happen to you, things that you do to control your own fears. And by the way, if you have ideas here and you want to chime in with things that you do that help you to control your own fears, by all means, I want to make this a shared conversation if I can. But that is a critical piece for leaders. And I just wrote something down. It sounds a little silly, but maybe this would work for you. I don't know. It kind of works for me sometimes. And I wrote here, I'm a leader. I can do it. Put a little power to it. You know, again, a little cheesy, but the idea is that sometimes you just need to kind of pep yourself up and say, I can do this. I was promoted to be a leader for a reason. People look up to me. They value me. And so project that confidence others have in you back to them. Okay. But you can only do that if you're controlling your own fears. So that is step number one. Leadership must be from the inside out. It can't be something that you fully project from the outside in, because at the end of the day, it'll break down. People will see through it. But if you can control your fears and you recognize things like worst case scenario, as well as things that you've done in the past to get through difficult situations. Maybe you were a leader back in the Great Recession 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and you led through that crisis, or you've led through other challenges. You can do this as well. So having the right mindset, the right self-talk is important. Number two, the word "and" here is capitalized because they might seem to be contradictory, but in reality, they go together. You want to be strong, but you also want to demonstrate vulnerability. You can't be a machine in times like this. Everybody knows that you're struggling. Everybody knows that they're struggling. Showing that you are vulnerable yet strong is a critical piece because people need someone who's relatable. And we all know that we're vulnerable. We, as in the people being led, we know that we're vulnerable, and we assume that our leaders are vulnerable as well. And they need to be able to express that in a healthy way, but at the same time to be strong, to recognize that we're in it together, to recognize that these are hard times. We haven't encountered them, whatever the proper talk is for you and your organization and your team. But at the same time, let them know that we will do this because we can. And we'll be able to look back at this and say that it made us stronger. Okay. So again, whatever I'm talking about over here, if you want to add a personal anecdote, if you want to just emphasize the point, or if you have a question about it, all of those things are fair game. I will try to get to everything that I can in the time that I have allotted. And so I hope that you will bear with me if I don't respond right away. Number three, prioritize others and manage stress. Okay, you might be familiar with the concept called servant leadership. A servant leader is somebody who puts others in position to succeed. I serve you so that you can accomplish your tasks. And so when others know that, you know, it's kind of like interesting, even with the government buyout or bailout, whatever we're calling it now, that was rolled out just today in the last few days, you know, in the negotiations on Capitol Hill. So the idea that you're going to bail out corporations and their CEOs are going to take a hefty bonus like you have, like what occurred the last time around. That's one of the things that there was a lot of talk about to ensure that that does not happen, because we don't want leaders who are going to take advantage of crisis. We want leaders who are going to put themselves out, who are going to lead by example, prioritize others, let everybody know how caring and concerned that they are, and do whatever they can to manage stress. And by the way, I will just mention that I do have a webinar scheduled tomorrow for much deeper conversation around stress management and productivity. We will touch on both today, but I'm not going to go as deep today as I will tomorrow. So if you go to my website, which is impactfulcoaching.com/upcoming-webinars, or just go to impactfulcoaching.com the homepage, /home, and then you go to the top navigation, you will find a link where it says upcoming webinars. You can click there and it'll give you the information for tomorrow's Zoom webinar, 2 o'clock, same time, on stress management and productivity. So quick review before we move forward. Controlling your own fears is critical. Be strong and yet show your vulnerability to others. Prioritize others in everything that you do and work to manage people's stress loads. The next one is be optimistic, right? You'll notice, by the way, that a lot of this, it doesn't all exist in its own silo, right? There's a lot of overlap here between points, and there needs to be. But being optimistic as a point, sharing optimistic concepts, sharing upbeat ideas, letting people know of good things that they're seeing, nationally, internationally, trends, whatever it might be, that are giving you reason for optimism, for hope, for a better tomorrow, right? People need you to feed them good news because unfortunately, the news and social media are feeding them bad news. Right? All we need to do is spend 10 minutes on any news channel and we'll feel like the entire world is coming apart. And so we as leaders want to be sharing positive messages, inspirational quotes, things that will create, that's really also number 6. So you see how they all blend here. You be optimistic and offer encouragement. So I'm moving from 4 to 6 for a moment. We'll come back to 5 shortly. So the optimism, the encouragement, the inspiration, you be that rock, you be that source, giving them positive things to hang their hats on and to really kind of mull over before, so that they can do their very best work and feel more comfortable. Because we know that if emotionally we're not in a good place, if we're constantly worrying about where the next shoe is going to drop, we cannot do our best work. So all of those are important. I will unpack number 5 in just a moment, but I'm just curious to know, of all the things that we've talked about so far, which is the one that you feel is most critical for leadership? Something that you would like to be focusing on for yourself and for your team that's going to help them move forward. Okay, so it's interesting, but not surprising again, that the numbers really are all over the place. Naomi, you are right. I'm going to get to number 5 in just a moment. But many of you are talking about 2 and 3 and 6 and some others as well. They're all important. And the reason that I choose to include so many here is because I want everybody to find the 1 or 2 that you will commit to try to be that person, to try to provide that messaging, to try to, create that environment for others. Okay, so now I do want to talk about number 5 in greater depth, the idea of building trust. Now, I want to be clear here that you hopefully have been building trust all throughout your interaction with your colleagues. This should not be a new conversation specific to the coronavirus. But I think that it becomes more complicated today in many ways to either build the trust or to retain the levels of trust that you've built thus far. Would anyone like to comment on that? Why would you suspect that building trust, or what's the word I'm looking for, maintaining trust levels, could be more challenging now than it is usually? Okay, so a lot of different ideas coming through. The distance and lack of face-to-face is important. Too much unknown. We don't see, we don't have the human interaction, all of that. Oh, wow, you guys are great. Okay, so a lot of this is important, by the way. We will come back to it with communication, but the idea that so much can be lost through text, so much can be lost through email. We need to attach human elements to every communication, or as many as we possibly can. Even if it's just a voice, the inflection of the voice, the tone of the voice, it matters. And the more that we can add that human element that so many of you are talking about, the better. Okay, excellent. And I'm keep it coming as we move into the next slide. I'd like you to see a certain trust model developed by Ken Blanchard and his associates. And I'm curious to know, I usually ask this question in one form, and I'm going to start there. And then I'm going to ask the question differently afterwards. So let's pretend that we were having this conversation 3 months ago. Regular environment, in your classrooms, in your offices, at your boardroom, wherever you'd be listening to this or having this conversation. Which of these four elements, and I'll go through them briefly with you, would you say is most important for a leader to be focused on and develop? Is it A, able, which means that the leader demonstrates competence? Is it B? And by the way, this is not all about leaders, this is about anybody, but let's focus from a leader standpoint. So A is able, that demonstrates competence. B is believable, that the leader acts with integrity. C is connected, that the leader cares about others. And D is dependable and maintains reliability, does what he or she says that they will do. So for now, let's focus on a regular non-corona atmosphere. Which of the three, just use a letter, that's fine. Is it A, B, C, or D for you that normally a leader would want to be most focused on? Okay, so I'm seeing mostly B's, C's, and D's. I'm curious to know about the A's. Some of you did write A. Maybe it's because at that point people feel like they don't need to be as competent as they need to do kind of like the soft skill pieces of it. But it's interesting that when it comes to what I would say A and D, the way I break it down normally is that A and D are more about what we might call technical skills. Number A is the ability to do it. D is that it will get done, right? It's not useful if I can do things and I don't actually do them. But the two of them together, if I've got A and I've got D, the likelihood is the job will get done. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a leader, right? It just means that you have the ability to work, and you may be, as Michael Gerber would call it, you're a technician in many cases. You have the ability to do the work. But what causes a leader to really stand out in many ways is their human or soft skill quotient, their emotional intelligence, if you will. And that in many cases comes primarily through B and C. Not that one group is better than the other, just the different elements here. So if I can believe you that you act with integrity, and if you are properly connected with me, then I am more prepared to follow you because I trust that what you're going to do is in my best interest and the best interest of the company at large. That's the basic breakdown that I would say typically. So now in our environment, your answers may be the same and they may be different. I'm curious. How would you say, from a leadership standpoint today, which of the four, if you had to choose one to get really, really good at, which would be the one that you would choose? Okay, so I'm seeing mainly B's and C's, and maybe my little pep talk before kind of skewed things. I don't know, and I hope not. But it definitely seems that there's a lot of B and C, some A mixed in as well. Obviously, you need to be competent, maybe now more so than ever. So to clarify here, I'm not saying necessarily that you have to all improve on these things per se. I have no idea where everybody's at, and there's no judgment here. It's just as we're thinking about our role as leaders in a remote environment. Let's go through all of them because I think each of them is useful to be thinking about. And I would encourage you to identify at least one quadrant that you want to work on in greater depth so that you can lead with greater confidence moving forward. So able means you have the skills and the problem solving ability and whatnot to get things done. And there are many problems that we're encountering now, a lot of skills that we have to develop that maybe we didn't have to develop until now relating to remote learning and otherwise. So that is an important piece. Believable. People should believe that what you are doing is with the highest level of integrity. When people are scared, they are suspicious. Just keep that in mind. When people are scared, they are suspicious. And because they are suspicious, they will often, even though they don't mean to, they will often think about what you're doing with less than optimistic or positive vantage point, right? They're not using the rose-colored glasses when they're looking at your behavior. So when you can demonstrate honesty, if you could admit when you're wrong, if you make mistakes, and we're all going to make mistakes in this confusing time, if you're careful not to talk about people behind their backs, even when they mess up, if you're sincere and you show respect, you will create a level of believability and integrity within your team that's going to carry you through the most difficult times. Because if we can't have each other, then we really have nothing. And so that part is very important. The next one, C, connected. We have to demonstrate deep care, listening well. So many times we think, or we're trained to think that we're the smartest person in the room and that our wisdom needs to shine forth. But being a great listener is one of the most important things that a leader can do and develop. Praising others, showing interest in their work, working well with them, being empathic. All of these are important. We talked about vulnerability and sharing about yourself, asking for input. We're going to talk about all this when we unpack communication. And finally, dependable. So if you say you're going to do something, do it. And if you can't do it, let people know that you can't do it and apologize and tell them when they could expect the new delivery date, if you will, to be. Timely, responsive, organized, accountable. People have no idea where you are. They have no idea what you're doing. They can only speculate because they cannot see you. So being responsive today is even more important than ever. And being dependable, and people know that you could be relied on for feedback, for guidance, for support. All of these things are critical. So if we stopped our webinar right here and we just talked about the key elements of leadership, just a brief review, if I may, before we move on to our next slide, the fact that, yes, we have to lead from in front in the sense of being strong. On the other hand, we want to position others to be successful, encouraging them, being optimistic, building trust around them, recognizing that we're all struggling here, managing people's stress. If we do all of these things, even in part, we're going to be helping ourselves and helping our team. Okay, so now let's talk about communication. And when it comes to communication, I've identified these as 5 critical components. Obviously, this is not everything, but I think that if we can be good at some, if not all of these, we're going to go a long way in helping our communication improve and help everybody get the information that they need in a timely fashion. Out of these 5, which is the one that you would say most resonates with you as being important for leaders in difficult times? Consistent, clear, just do it by number, proactive, positive, or collaborative. So that's why I include so many choices, because everybody's got a different perspective, and that's great. You know, the bottom line is what's important for you may not be important for somebody else and vice versa. So we want to hit on all of these as best as we can. Okay, so we want to be consistent, we want to be clear, we want to be proactive, we want our communication to be positive rather than negative, and we want it to be collaborative. Let's go through them one by one. Okay, now this is a quote that I saw in an article that I was reading recently about leadership. And the person who was the interviewee in the particular article was a former soldier and former leader on the battlefield. So consistency of communication is important. In the heat of battle, it's easy, almost natural, to shut down everything else and focus exclusively on the job at hand. That's a dangerous inclination, however. It's important to make communicating what's going on a priority as well. Your team and all your stakeholders need to know what's going on, or they can't contribute, right? So oftentimes when things get bad, we just want to go in and solve. And we forget that we need to be communicating. We forget that we need to be incorporating others in the conversation, etc. So consistency is important. And I think with anything, when it comes to consistency, setting a daily reminder, blocking out time, we'll talk about these a little bit later when we talk about productivity. These are important. Maybe you make this the last item of business before you close up your computer for the evening. have your morning communication ready. You can send it out and you can schedule your send, whether you're using a service like MailChimp or Gmail, it doesn't really matter. Many email services today allow you to schedule your communication so that people can open up their computers in the morning, open their phones, and get something from you. It doesn't necessarily have to be extensive. It doesn't have to be very deep or profound. It just means that you are keeping them in the loop. This is what's going on. This is what happened yesterday. This is what I'm seeing. Maybe you include a positive quote. You include something that somebody did. We'll talk about that more shortly. But your communication, if it's consistent and everybody knows that they could rely upon hearing from you, whether it's daily or a few times a week, and you let them know when that's going to be, and you kind of make that commitment to them, that is step number one in excellent communication. It should not be haphazard. Number two is be clear. And being clear means different things for different people. And we all know, especially the educators on the call, that there's something called modalities and intelligences, that different people communicate and also receive communication in different ways. So think about different ways that you're going to communicate using text, maybe voice notes, maybe you'll use Zoom or some other online platform, different ways to get information, to get information to people. I'm a big believer in getting to the point right away, not beating around the bush. It doesn't mean you have to be overly harsh, if you will, or overly abrupt in your conversation, but be clear on what you're trying to say, right? Because people want to know, bottom line, what you're there to tell them. And the clearer you are in what you share, and if you share just enough to make the points clear, that's going to deliver the most value for people. Now, if you're not sure what that looks like, I would encourage you to create a little communication team. So you may have a couple of people on your team, a couple of people that you have particular confidence in, that you're going to bounce communications off of in advance and say, did this make this point clearly? Is this something that needs a little more elaboration? Should I tighten this up a little bit? And getting that feedback before you send it out, especially something that may be a bit more sensitive or a bit more confusing, having that second pair of eyes look it over before you move forward is going to make a difference. So the clarity, the amount, all of these things contribute, and all of these things are important. Number three is, staying with be clear for a moment. Whenever you want to say to do or not to do, use examples or examples of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and check for understanding. Now, this checking for understanding piece is very important. Asking somebody, what was your takeaway from my communication? Before we end this call, what are the primary things you're planning to do as a result of what we discussed? That allows you to be sure that the other person gets it. Because, most communication is not the words that we say. A lot of it is the tone, and a lot of it is the nonverbals. And you can't measure those very well when the conversations are remote, especially not in text, but even in voice. So if you go a little bit deeper and you ask the individual, what did you think? What do you think I said? Or what do you think was the main point here? And what does that mean for you in terms of your activities for today? For example, then you'll get some concrete feedback and you'll know, was your information clearly delivered? Does the person know what to do as a result of what you are saying? Okay. Dwayne, I will be sharing a recording for everybody on this, and the deck will be part of that. So minimally that much you will get. And let's continue for now, please. Okay, being proactive. Now, I did mention before that you do want to have your communication be brief and to the point. On the other hand, better to over-communicate than under-communicate. So if you're not sure and you're kind of straddling the fence, better to include a little bit more or a little bit more often than the opposite, okay? And try to deliver information when people need it with enough time for processing. So if I'm going to go ahead and send out an email saying that we have a webinar on leading in difficult times, and I send it to you at 1:50 for a 2 o'clock webinar, that's not useful, right? Because you don't have enough time to process it. You don't have enough time to create time on your calendar. You don't have enough time to work with it to be able to show up. So if you want your people to deliver a particular project, or you want to be scheduling meetings or things like that, give them the information when they need it so that they can process it and do the right thing in the time that's needed before the deliverable is required. Are there any questions or comments on this communication sequence that we've been talking about so far? And in the meantime, I'm going to move into the next one, but feel free to include it in the chat if you have any questions, because I'd be more than happy to try to address them. All right. Now, this is hard for everybody. And by the way, if you're not familiar with it, there's something called True Colors. It's a form of leadership style, a diagnosis. And I oftentimes refer to two of the colors, one of which I identify with very much, and one which is in many ways the polar opposite of me. And those colors are green and blue. A blue is a very empathic, very loving, very caring type of leader. Somebody's always concerned about the well-being of the team. And the green is very action oriented, wanting to just kind of like jump through the emotions, get past all that stuff quickly, and get into the work and get things done. And so your leadership style does matter here, because you have to be honest with yourself and say, will my leadership style lend itself naturally to the situation in which we find ourselves? Or is it something I have to work harder on than normal, even because I can't even make it in a joking way and let people know that I'm not really being serious, because they can't see that side of me through the virtual communication. So positivity is a piece of that. No matter what your personality is, you want to be positive, because positivity drives the engine forward. It's what gets people going. It's what gets them excited about their work. It's what keeps them feeling mission driven and included and purposeful in a time where everything is up for grabs. So being thankful, commending others for taking initiative and for doing a good job, finding small step improvements in their work, discussing progress, offering concrete examples. All of these things come from a leader who is thinking with the cup half full, who's looking for ways to be encouraging, to be positive, to be motivating. And I would love to see, by the way, if everybody who wants to can share something that you've done very recently, without getting overly specific, that created positivity, that looked at a difficult situation in a positive way, and that encouraged other people to do their best work because of the words that you shared. So while we're thinking about positivity, I'm just going to bring us back to this slide for a moment to review the four that we've talked about so far before we get into the last one. So we've talked about being consistent, when we deliver our communication, how we do it, be clear, recognizing that different people take information in different ways, and asking them, did you get what I intended? What was your key takeaway? Really probing for more to make sure that people really understood what you're trying to say, make it actionable, make it clear. Proactive means you over communicate, you let people know information in advance, and of course the positivity. Okay, shared best practices, said thank you, created a group chat for positive things, YouTube videos. Wow, this is really encouraging. I'm going to really spend some time, I hope. I've got so many webinars I'm creating, I don't have time even to review them as much as I'd like, but I hope everybody here is looking at these comments and gaining from them and finding ideas of what we could be doing that is affirming and positive and encouraging. The creativity in this chat is awesome and really inspiring for me. Frankly, from a very selfish standpoint, this is probably why I do it more than anything else, because I can gain so much from just hearing your wisdom and your ideas. So please continue to share them, make sure that the positivity flows not only here on this chat, but in your environment, so that you are bringing your very best self and extracting the very best of others every day that you interact with them. And so this last piece here on the communication, the 5 points, is collaboration, right? Running effective meetings. You may not have meetings right now or may not have them as often, but you should try to meet often, because that's where the real interactions can occur. Yes, it's going to look different on Zoom or whatever platform, but do try to meet and do try to create opportunities for try to brainstorm for opportunities and solutions. If you're struggling with something, put it out there for the team, right? Let other people help you solve things, right? You don't have to have all the answers as the leader, especially today. We talked about vulnerability before. Everybody knows that this is new terrain for all of us. And if we could be out there collaborating and creating opportunities for others, that would be fantastic. Now, if you talk about Crystal, I'm going to get to your point in a minute, but everybody talking, I'm not exactly sure I understand the question, but I think I do. And I do want to come to that in a second. One thing I also want to mention about collaboration, you should be doing as much as you can to connect with peers, whether it's coming to webinars like this or connecting with colleagues. Maybe you belong to an organization like an association of independent schools, or maybe public school association of sorts, or maybe they have chat rooms or email lists or something that you could be brainstorming with peers like your own, like yourselves. That's all the school people. Obviously, if you're in business sense, you have hopefully your own networking, um, your own networking opportunities, or maybe you can even create them. Go on LinkedIn, create conversations or chats. Find places that you could be collaborating with others, because again, we have to fight the tendency or the forced tendency to be isolated. Right? We do our best work, many of us, when we're together, especially when we're extroverted. That's the way we do our best work. That's where we get our most energy. Find ways to collaborate and find ways to learn from each other. Okay, so you shared a ton there. Please keep them coming. For anyone who did not yet contribute, if you have any questions, here's an example, coming back to the comment I mentioned before, for a daily huddle, a morning huddle. So these are just ideas to think about. You might want to start every day with a very quick 10, 15-minute check-in with your team, right? Shout outs from yesterday's achievements. I'm looking at the left from the Red Banyan, for example, on the left side. I don't know if these are real or if these are fabricated, but each one is different, and they each add, I think, some unique concepts that are worth looking at least quickly. So congratulatory shout outs, how achievements exemplify values, giving people top priorities for the day, things that we want to be working on. That's from the right side. And the lean project, consulting version of it, you've got, are you on track with your commitments? What adjustments need to be made? How do we see we could work together better? So the kind of questions will differ by leader. They'll differ by environment. They'll differ by all sorts of things. But the main thing is, if you have a few questions, that if you're using these questions every day, number one, it creates an excuse to get together. It creates something to be focused on. Everybody knows that every day, these are the questions that are going to be asked. So every day my work is going to be driven around my ability to answer these questions tomorrow. So that creates an accountability element as well. And of course, it gives us opportunity to learn from each other, to brainstorm and to solve problems and to feel connected and team-like in this isolating time. Okay, anything from this particular list here that you think is just a very powerful question that you would like to use with your team if you haven't already? Shlomo, you raised an important point, and I think others talked about the idea as well, about the frequency of it. I think everybody needs to know their environment and what's appropriate. And maybe your people are just so overwhelmed. So if you're in education, you've got to be dealing with lesson planning and lesson delivery every day in an uncomfortable format. Maybe daily is just too often. So you have to know what's appropriate for you. But I definitely think that the frequent interactions is important, even if it's just the daily messaging we talked about before, and the fact that you're communicating what's going on and the inspiration, all of that, and giving your people opportunity to get together as often as you think is most appropriate for your environment. That's up to you. Just make sure that it happens. Okay, weekly cohort. Thank you, Claire. All right, you can keep those coming. We're going to move on because I want to make sure that we can wrap this up on time. Okay, so we've covered the first two. Again, the idea that you have to be strong in your leadership and we need to communicate. Let's talk a bit about productivity. Okay, I'm not going to be able to go through all of these in great detail, but I did want to present all of them to you as different ways by which we can start to think about increasing our productivity. You know, it's interesting. I heard on the news the other day that people are actually logged in for work more now than they were pre-corona. So it may just be the fact that people don't have the commute that they once dealt with, and so they're able to be in their computers earlier. But at the same time, I suspect most people, even with all that additional time logged in, are being less productive than before. I don't know if you would agree with that, but I definitely think that productivity is a challenge. When we're by ourselves, nobody's around us, nobody to inspire us, and frankly, nobody to check on us to see that we're really doing our work. It can be difficult for us in our isolated spaces to be as productive as we'd like to be. So I'm going to go through a few of these in greater detail. Number one, maybe, these are not numbered, but I'm just starting left to right. The first one, which is remove distractors, I think can be extremely powerful for us. By the way, when we talk about leaders and the role of leading in difficult times, these are things we want to be sharing. You know, pick the right ones that you think are relevant to your team, but just sharing good productivity tips that work for you, certainly, and will help you lead others better, but also will help others to be more mindful of their work and get more done because, frankly, we have less time with our families at home in many cases. With all the other stressors that we're dealing with, we don't have the bandwidth for sure, or even the amount of time that we once did to do our best work. So we want to make as much productivity, we want to make productivity as much of a focus as we can so that the time that we do have, we're utilizing it in the best way. So distractors are everywhere. So you can't really necessarily manage, if your distractor is a child, you know, you don't necessarily have control over when they need your attention or their help, and everybody's home dynamic is different. But the distractors certainly of social media, the distractors of our phones and the news, right? There are times where we can go ahead and get that information. We could be disciplined about doing that, how much time we devote to it, and when we allow that to be part of our day. But outside of that, keeping the distractors away from us, powering down, not being on social media, frankly, not even being on the internet whenever we're doing our work, except for what we need for our work. Okay. So if we're mindful of the fact that even, you know, even being on YouTube, I find this all the time. I want to play some music or do whatever it is. I'm just listening to the background. I'm not even looking at the video as it's playing. It distracts me. And over time, it causes me to click on something else and something else. So everybody reacts to it differently. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but it's definitely something to be mindful of. The things that have to get done, you want to be scheduling them and you want to be blocking time. If it's something that takes a meaningful amount of time and concentration, you want to clear your schedule of anything else that could possibly interrupt with it and put that time blocked in so that the work gets done. In many cases, we're talking about a minimum of 60 and oftentimes closer to 90 minutes. We work very well. There's a lot of research to support this. We work very well in 90-minute blocks. So if we can kind of take our breaks and, you know, feed ourselves and take care of our physiological needs and they get all in on a task, as we'll talk about shortly with going all in, and use the time and block it out and really get meaningful work done, you'll get more done in that block of time than you will if you're trying to do bits and pieces and stops and starts, which so many of us are dealing with the constant distractions. So if you have messaging on your phone, disable it. If you have WhatsApp open on your phone, turn it off. If you have social media active on your phone, again, close it out. Schedule the time, do the things that need to be done, block it out. Okay, we're going to focus on the kinds of tasks that we want to do that are going to deliver the greatest outcome. I hope everybody has seen all of these that are here on the screen. I'll go through them quickly. We talked about removing distractors and scheduling tasks. This one I just added this morning, the idea of informing others what you're working on, because that creates accountability. People know you're working on it, then you need to show up with some kind of product. Otherwise, you wasted your time and everybody knows it. So you're kind of risking it a little bit, but you're letting everybody know this is what I'm working on, and you can hold me accountable for getting it done. When you go into tasks, go all in, like we talked about, get rid of the distractors. Any small tasks, knock out the short ones quickly so that you can focus on the big ones with more intention. Try your best to maintain high energy levels. A lot of that has to do with self-care and how you prime yourself and all of that. Hopefully we'll have time a different day to focus on that. And of course, the last one for now is to provide learning opportunities, which means that if you want your people to be more productive, oftentimes they need new skills. And by identifying what their needs are and then giving them the skills, whether it's webinar presentation skills or selling in a different type of environment, different type of market, understanding new conditions based on current realities, those trainings are going to help as well to make sure that your people are productive. You may be familiar with this, and this is going to be the last piece that we're going to be focusing on today. It's called the Eisenhower Matrix. It was made famous by Stephen Covey and others who deal with matters relating to things that are urgent and or important, or the opposite, where they're neither urgent nor important. And you might be familiar with the matrix where it moves from what we call quadrant 1, which is the top left, which says do, which is urgent and important. Quadrant 2, which is the top right, which is important but not urgent. Quadrant 3, which is the bottom left, which says delegate, which is not important but urgent. And then finally, number 4, bottom right, which is not urgent and not important. And if you spent the time, and there are ways by which to do this, I do this with my clients, where we go through the regular activities that you typically do with yourself, with your team, you could start to identify which quadrant those activities typically fall in. So for example, if you're dealing with a deadline and it has to be done now because your client is waiting for it and it's essential and all of that, it is both urgent and important. Now you want to avoid these as much as you can, obviously. You don't want to be in situations where you have to be in reactive mode. But if there's a fire in the building, you got to deal with it. You can't really avoid that. The best place to be, typically, for leaders is number 2, which means it's something that could be deferred. It doesn't have to be dealt with immediately, but that's where the planning and the learning and the creativity, all the growth exercises typically exist in quadrant number 2. So anything about the future of the company and the general direction and the kinds of visions, the kind of values, the vision for the company, that's typically what fits into that quadrant. Now, for quadrant number 3, which are the things that you can delegate, remember, as the leader, for you to be productive and for you to lead others, you need to be clearing your plate of the kinds of things that get in your way of your progress. So therefore, the things that would constitute interruptions, many of the emails that we get, some of the meetings that we have to schedule, or maybe even some tasks that don't necessarily have to be done by you, if you can delegate those to others, whether it's a secretary or whether it's somebody else on your team, to take that responsibility from you so that you could be operating primarily in quadrant number 2, that's an important consideration. And then finally, number 4, and yes, I will try to make sure everybody gets the content. Thank you for asking, Heidi. For number 4, delete. Get rid of all the stuff, and we are bombarded. People are emailing me. I'm getting emails, double the amount of emails every day now, so many communications, and it just feels like everybody wants our attention, constantly grabbing at our mind. Whatever you can delete, get off of your plate completely. Don't even pay attention to it, because it's really not important. When you're focused on the more important things, the better. Okay? There's a lot really here to unpack. I was just trying to give you the broad strokes of the Eisenhower Matrix and how it works, and how each of the tasks that you do does fit into one of these 4. Almost all the time, it's pretty clear where it belongs, and therefore you can make more strategic decisions. Is this something I, as the leader, need to do? Is it in line with my skill set, with my pay grade, with my job responsibility? And if not, I need to either delegate it or I need to delete it, because I need to be doing the work that matters most. My company must have me doing the right things now more so than ever. So I need to be productive, and I need to make sure that my team is being productive. And if I'm communicating with them, if I'm checking on them, if I'm following up with them, if I'm moving things along, if I'm exploring new business opportunities, collaborating, all that, that's the leader's job. That's what we should all be doing. Everything else could be handled by somebody else or shouldn't be handled at all. Again, broad strokes here, but it gives us a framework. So let's briefly review before we wrap up. We talked about that there are 3 primary challenges that leaders are facing right now in this very unsettled environment. Number 1 is everything Corona related, just the general uncertainty, markets, environment, etc. Number 2, communication. And number 3, lack of productivity. And they're all interrelated, right? If I can't see you, I can't communicate as well with you. If I'm not in the same space, things will drop off. If I If I don't see you and we don't touch bases often and I have more distractions, I've got things going on at home, my productivity will suffer. The leaders as well as everybody else's. So if we can step in and utilize these various techniques that we've talked about, being strong, being open, being vulnerable, being clear and communicative, caring deeply about others and letting them know that, sharing information regularly in ways that people can understand it, that the feedback that you're getting is indicating that you're clear, you're consistent, you're involving others, and it's at the same time thinking about how can we be more productive and sharing strategies with others as well about doing the right work and doing it for blocks of time without distractions and knocking out the quick things right away so you could focus on the important stuff with more attention, doing it when you have the highest level of energy. For me, that's like 8 o'clock in the morning. For some people, it might be 3 in the afternoon. You know yourself, and create the environment, the self-care and all of that that's going to feed into you doing the right work in the right way. You are going to amplify productivity and you're going to get a lot more done. So those are the 3 points that I wanted to review with you. And one last point to think about: when you are stuck and you don't have a framework in your own head about how to solve it, one technique that I often find is I think of a leader, somebody who inspires me, somebody who I know well enough to answer this question, and I ask myself, what would this person do in my situation? How would he or she get through this? How would they overcome? Okay, so let's briefly review. I think we already did. I forgot I had the slide, so forgive me. There's a lot of content here, right? We need to provide strong leadership. We need to communicate effectively, and we need to increase productivity. And if you could now take a moment before you hang up, so to speak, and leave the call, tell me which of these 3 are you going to try your best within this space. Obviously, there are details, within each one, but number 1, number 2, or number 3, which is the one that you want to work on so that you can be the very best leader for your team moving forward? Seeing lots of 1s and 2s, saw some 3s earlier as well, which leads me to believe that these were important ones. And I'm so glad that you were able to join me. As I mentioned, I will be offering a webinar tomorrow where I'll go deeper on managing stress, personal as well as team, as well as more tips on productivity. I hope that you found this time to be valuable. And this is a way by which you can reach out to me. If you want to continue the conversation, I'd love to be able to find ways to support you moving forward. And really, again, the community piece is critical here. I hope that we can continue to find ways to support each other. Know you're not alone. Know that there are a lot of leaders out there struggling like you. At the same time, there are a lot of leaders out there overcoming this as you are. And we will all grow from this. We will always look back at this and we will say these were hard times, but I grew in real ways because I understood that my leadership was critical for the others that I'm supporting. And if we maintain this mindset moving forward, it'll just be a transformative experience. So thank you all again. You will get an email from me with the recording. And if there are others that you feel would benefit from participating, please share that with them as well. Have a great day. Keep up the great work and keep after it. And I'm hopeful that our prayers will be heard and we'll be able to do these live and who knows what in the future. Have a great day, everyone.